Okay, get into presentation mode. So I mentioned yesterday, today we're going to be starting the topic on elicitation and collaboration. This is basically about requirement gathering. I know since we started the training, the BA training, I've had, people ask questions about how do I go about requirement gathering and what type of questions should I ask. So I'm hoping to be able to answer all of your questions as I walk through the lesson. And if you still have other questions, I'll be more than happy to take your questions. So, most likely everybody on the call has heard someone say requirement gathering, right? Somebody using those words in a sentence. And so typically when you hear requirement elicitation, it's really the same as requirement gathering. You're eliciting information, you're seeking for information from people, from whoever it is you're talking to. Okay, so let's break it down. What are actual requirements? Before we get into how to go about gathering the requirement, what are requirements? Requirements is someone's requirement is their need. So an organization's requirement is a need they need fulfilled. Okay? It's the organization expectation that they want to be a reality in the future. Okay, if we think about regular day-to-day living, you walk into a restaurant and they say, what would you like to eat today? They are trying to gather your food requirement. What do you require? What do you need? Typically, there's a goal, right? I'm hungry. I don't want to be hungry anymore. Or I need to feed my body the right nutrients, right? That is my goal. That is my business requirement, right? So my requirement is that I need a meal. What type of meal do I need? Do I want some carbs, protein, vegetables, and all of that, right? Those will form a part of my food requirement. So when you get to your company as well, just think of what I just explained on a larger scale. Your company has a need. There are different parts to the need. They've hired you to be able to understand what those needs are, right? And you may be thinking, well, the company has the needs. Shouldn't they know what their needs are? Not necessarily, right? They have a high level understanding of what their need is, but the lower level, at the user story level, or at the functional requirement level, they may not have envisioned that, and that's why they're hiring you. The same way when you tell them, oh, I'd like to order a meal. And they would ask you, what components do you want? And then you say protein, carbohydrate, and all of that. You think, well, if I tell you protein, carbohydrate, you should be able to figure out the rest. But no, because protein could be fish, could be chicken, right? It could be beef. It could be something a bit, chewy, right? So I'm going to look at who's this customer who has this food requirement. If I was to prepare protein for a 3-year-old, it would be different from if I was to prepare it for a 30-year-old, right? And those are the different ways to start thinking, like you don't take whatever they've told you at face value and run with it, because chances are you're going to come back with a wrong solution, right? So decomposing, right? I explained the word decomposing a while back, which is really breaking something down. They've given you, like, when they say how to eat an elephant, right? You don't eat the whole of the elephant at once. They present you with an elephant, right? You decompose it, you break it down into small pieces. They want a meal. What does that even mean? A meal for a baby is milk. A meal for an adult is real food that you'd need to chew. Okay? So we talked about the fact that we have business requirement. This is just a recap, right? Because we've talked about this before. Business requirement, that is the need of the organization, right? It's usually something high level, something that you can't build, like something that you can't test. If a company says, oh, we need a CRM tool, how can you test a CRM tool? Right? We need to break it down. What does that mean? We build it and then we test it. So business requirement is usually high level, the high level need of your organization. Then we have functional requirement, right? Which will cater to how the company is going to implement the business requirements, right? So we know that we're going to have a new tool. We're going to have a homepage now. End users are going to be able to visit our homepage. They're going to be able to create an account. They will be able to make a purchase. They'll be able to request support, all those different things, right? Then we have non-functional requirements, which is really requirements around the behavior of the system, not the functions that we can perform in the system, but the behavior of the functions, right? We need to display a welcome message to every new user. That is a functional requirement. However, the message loading within 3 seconds is non-functional, because the message loading within 3 seconds has nothing to do with anybody doing anything. It is just how the system would behave. Okay? Then moving on here, let's look a bit more about business requirements. So I'm not going to be focusing on technical requirements and all of that. If you need more information, I'm sure you can find some online. I want to focus on the core of what a BA will need to do. Not the 5 to 10% that you're not likely to encounter, even if you were to work as a BA for 10 years. Okay, so like I mentioned earlier, business requirements are high-level goals, objectives, or needs of the business. So what is the business opportunity or problem? 1 second. Okay, what is the business opportunity or that we want to take advantage of, or the problem we want to solve? What is the vision of the company? What are the key issues the company is facing today? For example, they're losing customers, they're not able to get new customers, things like that. What are the goals of the project? By the time we finish implementing this project, what state would we be in? What are the benefits of the project, right? And what are the measurable benefits that we anticipate? So remember when I presented a business case to you, right? I talked about the return on investment. These are the benefits, right? Once we go live every year for the next 5 years, we will be able to increase our revenue by 2 million while saving XYZ dollars. Okay? So again, just remember business requirements is something very high level, and the business requirement feeds the functional requirement. You may or may not be a part of putting together the business requirement, but if you are, now you understand the type of information that will be in the business requirement. Yes, your company might have the business requirement and the functional requirement in one document, but even if it is in the same document, it will still be separated. Like they're not going to put functional requirements in the middle of business requirements, at least if they know what they're doing anyway. Okay? So functional requirement describes specific capabilities the solution should be able to perform. So again, I've given you a few examples before. What does the system have to do to support the end user? What action should the end user be able to perform in the system? When the user does a particular task, what should happen? Right? What features can the end user expect? What function should they be able to perform in the system? So when we looked at user stories, we talked about creating an account, accessing the account, things like that, right? Think about your bank. What are the functional requirements? You're able to deposit money, you're able to withdraw money from the ATM or from the teller. You're able to apply for a loan, you're able to do many different things. For your online banking, what are the things you're able to do? You're able to view your account, you're able to make payments in your account, you're able to receive payments into your account. So even though to you it's a system that you're using today, but someone thought about what does Mobile need to be able to do in the system? What does Joe need to be able to do? What value are we providing, right? What are the requirements of the end users? Okay, so those are your functional requirements. Non-functional requirements, we've talked about it. The speed, right? How guided the system is, the throughput, the capacity, how many people can be in the system at once without the system shutting down. Okay, those are your non-functional requirements. So let's prepare for elicitation here. As a BA, they've hired you. You know you're going to be gathering requirements, right? What should you do to plan yourself to make sure you're tackling this the right way? One is you want to have a clear definition of the area of interest. So again, if this project was as huge as an elephant, you don't want to start talking about the head of the elephant today and you're talking about the leg tomorrow. Compartmentalize it. Okay, this scope is this large. However, there needs to be a logical sequence to how you're going to tackle it. So this part of the project, right, is what I'm going to start with. And that means maybe I'm meeting with the marketing manager to understand their requirements. And then from there, I'm going to go to the sales department. But for you to know who you're going to first, you even need to understand who's in scope, right? What are we talking about here? They say they're implementing Salesforce. You need to ask which departments will be impacted by this implementation. Okay? Secondly, define a time frame for generating ideas. And what do we mean? When we talk about determining time frame, so there are two different time frames here. There is from a project management level, right? They've determined that based on the size of this project, they're going to give the BA 3 months to gather the requirements, right? Now you have 3 months to work with. You know that you have about 10 stakeholders that you're going to meet with during the 3-month period. You, as the BA, need to figure out where is your starting point. Who do you talk to first? Who do you talk to next? Just planning yourself basically. And then when you start talking to them, how long are you going to talk about this? How long are you going to talk about that? When you're first starting out, right? Because especially if you don't really have a lot of experience, you will figure out your own velocity with time, how long things are taking you. And then if it's taking you too long, you know that you need to speed it up. If they're giving you 3 months to gather requirements, and then in month 2, you are 30% done, you're behind. One of two things, they didn't give you enough time, or two, you're still working your requirement gathering ability. You haven't fine-tuned it yet. Okay, how long it's going to take you when you start in your planning, you need to figure it out. How long it will take me may be different from you, because I've been gathering requirement for a while, right? When I go into the meeting, I know the angle I want to start asking questions from. I know how to get them talking. If you're like that, fantastic, right? But if you're new to it, like when I was new to it, it took time as well. So again, all of this is plan yourself. Don't get caught up talking about one thing for 90 minutes in a 2-hour meeting where you have 5 things to talk about. If you're still on number 1.5 hours into it, can you reasonably finish the other 4 within half an hour? And sometimes there are legit reasons why item 1 alone will take so much time, right? But know the difference between that and when you just haven't figured out how to navigate the conversation. In this lesson, I'll talk about how to go about answering questions, but I'll be honest with you, no matter how much I tell you how to ask questions, you will still need to practice to get to your level, that point of, practice makes perfect, if you understand what I mean. I'll share all these things with you, but the improvement is in the doing. It is not in the teaching. And that's why I hear people say, I want to hire a BA with 8 years experience. They know what they're talking about, right? Now, does it mean that you can't do it because you don't have 8 years experience? That's not what I'm saying. I mean, I had my year 1, 2, and someone took a chance on me, right? But I'm saying that some of these things, practice makes perfect. Okay? So I just needed to make that clear. 3, aim for participants who represent a range of applicable background, right? So now you're gathering requirements, right, about this part of the project, and you're talking to 3 people. The 3 people you're talking to think alike, talk alike, behave alike, have the same responses. Well, that may not be the best way to go about it, right? Because if you only hear from their standpoint, but there's a different standpoint that is as valid as theirs, you would have missed out on some of the requirements, and you will find out later, and then it won't look good on you. Okay, so what are we saying here? When you're choosing your stakeholders that you're going to be gathering requirement from, right? Initially, you're going to start with a list that maybe the project manager tells you a few people, the project sponsor tells you a few people, and as you meet with those people, right, the list will continue to expand. Try not to make everybody you're talking to be like in the same department, on the same level, doing the same task. Okay, that's what we're saying here. A range of backgrounds, people that may have different views of the same topic. That's what you want. You want to hear the different views, because the different views exist for a reason. Okay, if you get all your requirements from a group of people who think alike, talk alike, and all of that, chances are you're going to build the solution the way they like it. But what about all the other people? What about what other people need to be able to do in the system? So that's what we're talking here. And help your respondents understand what is required of them. If you're going to be having a meeting, you schedule the meeting. in the body of the meeting, tell them what you're looking for. Don't just schedule a meeting and then they don't know anything about what you want to talk about. They show up in your meeting, and in the 1 hour or 2 hours that they're meeting with you, instead of giving you the information you need, they're even first trying to understand why they're even talking to you. I know there's a limit to what you can put in an email, right? But at least give them an idea. When you give them an idea, it helps them come to the meeting prepared. Granted, there are some people who will still come unprepared, even if you put a voice note in that meeting invite. But do your part, is what we're saying here. Help them understand this is the meeting, this is the purpose of the meeting, this is what we're going to talk about in the meeting. If you have any documentation, that has information on this topic, please send it to me before the meeting. That way, even I can come better prepared. Because if you're able to, if there's existing documentation and you're able to share it with me, then I can read it, and it may even help inform some of the questions that I will ask during the meeting. Okay? So when you're in this meeting, right, you want to gather requirements that tie to the business requirements. We established that, right? Again, this is still high level, not to worry. We're going to get a bit more detailed. When you get the requirements, you want to verify. Verifying requirement can be as simple as reading it back to them. So thank you for what you just explained. My understanding is this. Say it back to them in the way that you understand it so they can tell you yay or nay. Okay? So you always want to verify your requirements. We know that you communicate the requirements to your technical team, right? The people actually building the solution. And then you're going to manage the requirements throughout the software development lifecycle. So what does that mean? We got the requirements in January, we're building it in February, we're testing it in March, we're ready to do UAT in April. We do UAT in April, we get some feedback. They tell us we need to fix a few things. We fix it in May. We go back into UAT, they're happy, we get sign off on the requirements. So do you see that you gathering the requirements in one meeting is not the end of the requirement? You just don't dump it on the technical team. You're basically following each of the requirements you've gathered to make sure that they are, if we need to build it, if it's still a valid requirement, we build it, it's all good. If we find out at some point that that requirement is no longer valid, then we're not building it. Okay? When you're asking questions during a requirement gathering session, you want to ask why until all questions are resolved, or until you understand what it is they're trying to tell you. Like they tell you, oh, so we submit this document to this. Okay, you submit it. Why do you submit it? It's important for you as a BA to know why they submit it, because today they're doing it manually, right? They take a piece of paper, marketing manager, and then marketing manager takes it to maybe sales manager. Because it's all manual, there are no rules, right? It's manual. All we need to ensure today is somebody takes it from point A to point B. But in the future, this is going to be done in the system. So we need to understand, well, so you're submitting this document to the sales manager. Why are you doing it? Oh, we're doing it because the sales manager needs to approve before we can make payments. But if you didn't ask the why, you only took it that they're going to submit it. And if you run with that alone, what would you build in the system? The ability for A to send the document to B, right? And you stop there. That's an incomplete requirement. Maybe when the marketing manager even sends it to the sales manager and he approves it, we need a second signature. So if you only stop at, oh, why do you submit it to the sales manager? Oh, we send it to the sales manager so he can approve it. Oh, okay, he can approve it. If you stop there, it's different from, so when the sales manager approves it, what happens next? Well, actually, we require 2 signatures at any point in time. Then your next question will be, how do you get the second signature? So you see, you walked in there not even knowing their processes at all. But with everything they're telling you, you're asking why, who, when. Okay? I hope we're following this conversation here. So let's look at an example here. Is this diagram legible? Can you see it?
Yes.
You can? Okay, fantastic. Thank you for that. So what is the problem here? Our client is refusing to pay for leaflets we printed for him. The BA says, why? Then they respond and say, well, the delivery was late, so the client couldn't use them. The BA says, but why was the delivery late? The job took longer than we expected. Why did it take longer? I mean, you've been in this business for a while, so you should know how long it will take to print 10,000 leaflets, right? Well, we ran out of printer ink. So when you took the job, you saw that this was 10,000. You know that normally when you buy the ink in January, it lasts you till May, right? And now you got this job in May, meaning that your ink has almost run out, right? Did you know your ink has almost, like, why did your ink run out? Well, because before we got this order for to print 10,000 leaflets, the last order that came before that was also very large. So we used all of the ink on that other order, right? And then you'd be like, okay, so you used all of your ink on that order, on the second to the last order, and you didn't know you didn't have enough ink, right? Or a question along those lines. And they'd be like, well, we didn't have enough ink in stock and we couldn't order on time. So yes, we realized we didn't have enough ink and we tried to place an order, but the order wasn't coming fast enough for us to be able to meet this last order. And then we're going to brainstorm together. We don't want this happening again. We don't want an unhappy customer, right? What are we going to do about it? Countermeasure, find an ink supplier who can deliver a short notice. So that if we ever run into this situation, lack of ink will not be an issue. So this is non-IT. This happens even in our day-to-day life. Why did you get to work late today? I woke up late. Why did you wake up late? I went to bed late. Why did you go to bed late? I was watching a movie. What is a countermeasure? No more movies on a school night or on a work night, if there's anything like work nights. So again, these are non-IT, but I hope you're getting the gist. So it's not like you're going to stand in front of your stakeholder and keep saying why, why. You're going to annoy them if you do that. So it's not just why. Be like, okay, so you ran out of ink. Why didn't you order? Why is somebody not checking the stock to see how low it is so you can order on time, right? Things like that. It's going to be like, why is what you're going to begin your question with, but you're asking a real question. You're not just saying why, right? Even now that I'm saying it, I'm sure like somebody's getting irritated just saying why. Okay. So when we get all of this information right, one of the main things you're doing here is that remember that we're trying to tie everything to the business requirement. So when we go into a meeting and they're telling us about something that isn't really tied to this business requirement, right? You'd acknowledge it, but you let them know this is not within scope of what we're talking about, right? We want to know what we need. What do you need that is within scope of this project that we need to deliver to you as a project delivery, right? One of the things that we need to deliver as part of the project, right? We talked about acceptance criteria. So now that you have the requirements, you've shared it with your technical team, it's been built, it's been tested, it's all good, right? How do we determine it's all good? Remember all the acceptance criteria that we said we must define, right? Did they all pass? Okay? Sometimes when we build and we go show it to the end user, they're going to give us feedback, and that feedback may include that we need to make some changes, right? So we'll take it away, we'll make the changes, or there may be a bug in what we've built. We'll fix it and then we'll come back to them. But the acceptance criteria must pass. If you write a requirement like a user story that doesn't have an acceptance criteria, there is a very high chance that you have to rework it. Because imagine we create the login page, but all those business rules that were included in the acceptance criteria, the BA didn't even the BA didn't realize the need to have all of those captures. So of course, when you gave it to the development team, they built your user story. There was no acceptance criteria. It will fail woefully when you go to show it to your end users, right? And then it's going to require more work, more BA work, more dev work, more QA work. The BA basically costing the project a lot of money. Okay. So we're just, again, talking a bit about acceptance criteria because it's very important, right? Apart from the acceptance criteria helping to properly scope the user story, oftentimes the testers use it as a starting point to create their test plan and test data. If you happen to be a BA that will even be supporting testing, by having, because sometimes they do ask BAs to support testing, right? If you have well documented acceptance criteria, it would really help you. It will help even your team members. Your team members would really like you because having clear acceptance criteria reduces some questions, right? Because if not, it becomes guesswork. Should this happen? Should that happen? But if it's documented clearly, everybody can see what should happen. Okay. If there is no acceptance criteria, it is hard, almost impossible to determine if the requirement has been met. Okay. It is when all of the acceptance criteria has been tested and they've all passed, I would say we've completed testing. So we are not just testing the user story, we will test the acceptance criteria as well. And then if it's all good, we will say that testing has been completed. So let's look at a user story closely again. As a user, I want to be able to create an account so that I can submit an application. So if somebody were to be writing it, they could write it this way. Only new users should be able to create an account. You see how A is not included as part of a user story. But imagine that we didn't have acceptance criteria. There is nothing in the user story itself that says duplicate accounts are not allowed. There is nothing in the user story that says that. So I hope again we're seeing the importance of acceptance criteria. All required fields must be filled in order to submit a new account request, and we listed which fields are mandatory. A username must be unique. An email address can be associated with only one account. Someone else might argue and say, well, why didn't we just include all of this information in the user story? Why are we splitting it up into user story and acceptance criteria? And my response to the person was, if you take everything we have in the acceptance criteria and include it in the user story, would it still be a story from the perspective of the user? Which user in any planet will tell you their requirement and tell you everything you have in here? I haven't met many users who will do that. The way users think, which is really the foundation of a user story, is what is the requirement of the user from the user standpoint. That is what a user story captures. Why it does it, I do not know. It is just the standard. Okay? So please put as much effort, if not more effort, into your acceptance criteria. I know right now it's very theoretical as I'm saying it to you, but in practice, you'll be amazed at how much money can be wasted on rework because the acceptance criteria wasn't properly documented. And there's something that happens in project environments. I've seen it all the time. People will push blame at the slightest opportunity. Do not be that person that everybody is going to blame it on. And in all honesty, if you don't define your acceptance criteria properly, I don't think it'd be a matter of pushing blame. I think that the BA should really take that one on. Okay, I think I've overflogged acceptance criteria. We get the gist of it. Okay, so how user stories relate to acceptance criteria. So remember we talked about our product backlog, right? And then from the product backlog, we pull in the user stories we're going to address in the sprint. The epic, which is a huge user story, right, can be in the product backlog as well. But so will because again, if you're using a tool like Jira, for anybody who has seen Jira, we put the epic, which is the very high level user story, and under that epic, maybe we have 10 or 20 user stories, but we may not necessarily be building all 10 or 20 user stories in one sprint, right? So whichever ones you want to build, we pull them into the next sprint, right? And for each user story, you can see on here, there's 2 acceptance criteria. For yours, there may be 3, but again, general practice, you don't want to have 10 acceptance criteria. That already tells me that user story needs to be split. Okay, so now that you've gathered the requirements, you're going to verify them. I mentioned them earlier, right? The people that you gather the requirements from, Because remember, it was conversations you had with them, right? And then you took that away and documented it. Send that document back to them. Let them read it. If it makes sense to them, right? Can they confirm to you that is what they actually asked for? Okay. You can do this through presentations, seminars, workshops, or even just emailing them the document and say, please review and add your comments in there, depending, right? If it's a very big document, doing a presentation may not be the best, right? Because how long do you want to keep them in a presentation plan? Sometimes it may take them days, because remember, they have their own regular job. Their job is not to review your documentation. They're reviewing your documentation as part of the project, but they still have their own regular job that they need to do. So it may take them days to get back to you. And so you may need to email it to them and they'll get back to you on it. Okay? Requirements should be presented in a useful format. So use understandable terminology and concept. Don't use acronyms in there. Don't use project management terminologies in there. Your end users don't think in acronyms and all of these terminologies we're talking about. Write it in plain English. You will not impress anybody by making it sound more complicated than it actually is. Okay? And tailor the communication to your audience. Speak the language of your audience, but do not change your message. Your message should be consistent regardless of who you're sharing it with, but the method of communication may change. To some, a PowerPoint presentation might be the best. To others, it may be a Word document. And to another group, it may be an actual conversation where we're talking about it. But your message should be consistent. 3 different groups should not read your requirements and interpret it differently, is what we're saying here. So even though you're tailoring the communication to your audience, the message should remain the same. Okay, so here we're moving on to organizing your requirements. As you continue to gather requirements during this 3-month period, the list of requirements will continue to grow, right? More and more requirements. Please organize them. All the requirements that have to do with account creation and logging in, group them together. If you're sharing a requirement document with a business and you have 100 user stories in there, user story 1 cannot be create account and then user story 99 is login, right? There is no sequence to that. People should read the requirement document and there should be a logical sequence. They should be able to follow it and it's making sense. So rearrange them, group the requirements, but even within the grouping, let there be a flow to make it easy for the person reading it. Sometimes the BA might say, oh, I sent them the document, it's taking them forever to read it. That's because it's hard to read what you send to them. In the midst of their busy day, they're trying to dedicate 1 hour. And in the 1 hour, they can't even get past line 5 because everything is all over. Okay? Always check your requirements for completeness and consistency. Right? Before you send it to them. So that when you send it to them, again, it's easy for them to read through it. Okay? When you're organizing your requirement, consider links and dependencies. Sometimes there's a requirement that can't happen until this other requirement happens. Right? So it may make sense to put them together so that the person reading can immediately see the dependency when they're reading the document. Okay, I've talked about requirement groupings, right? You can group by business area, you can group by business process, you can group by use case, but group by something. Whatever is most logical to your situation, group by that. Especially when you have a long list of requirements. There is no standard to say, oh, it's better to group by business area or business process, but choose one and be consistent with it. That's what I'm trying to say here. Okay? This is another way to group, right? For your non-functional requirements, the requirements that have to do with performance, how fast the page should load, how fast a page should load, things like that, group them together. Requirements that have to do with access, group them together. Availability, group them together. Security, group them together. For your general requirements, these are just some examples in here that a BA or a non-BA can use. For the technical requirements, even though you're not going to be writing it, but in the rare case that this was you grouping it together, group hardware together, group software together. So I hope you get the gist of what I'm saying in here. The main message here is about grouping. How you choose to group it needs to be logical. There is no particular one isn't better than the other, is what I'm saying here. Okay? But group by, I like to group by. Let me show you what I like to group by. I like to group by business area or business process. Because sometimes, right, when I send the document to multiple people to read, one person is more interested in their own business area. They don't want to read about the other departments because they just don't have time for it. But if I mix everything together, now they have to find the one that relates to them. Chances are they're not going to get back to me on time. Okay? Now, sometimes, right, you get requirements where only one of the two can be done. One person says, do it this way, we want it this way. The other person says, we want it that other way. Okay? So we have what we call requirements discussion. If you have a requirement, so two total requirements, right? One from A, one from B, and those requirements do not agree, you may want to pull the two of them into a meeting, especially if they're not two people that hate one another, right? And let's discuss the requirement. Which one is the valid one? Or which one is more applicable to our business requirements? Let's have a conversation about it. Do not involve yourself in the decision. Guide them in making the decision to resolve the conflicting requirements. Then we have what we call requirement prioritization. So there are different techniques for prioritizing requirement. The one we're going to focus on today is called the MOSCO. MOSCO stands for must have, should have, could have, and won't have. What that means is that as you continue to gather requirements, there's some requirements that if those requirements are not fulfilled, that project has failed. Like these are the non-negotiable requirements. Then we have should have. Should have are the requirements that if we had enough money or enough time, they would have been must-haves. But given the fact that we don't have all the money in the world and all the time in the world, we're going to push these ones a little lower than must-have. Could have would be if we build this requirement, it will be great, but it is not likely we can build them now. You know, oh, I could do with this additional functionality if you built it, right? And then we have the won't have, like it's not happening. Not in this phase anyway. Maybe if more money comes later on, then we could deliver it. Now, understand a few things about prioritizing requirement. Something that is a won't have today may be the must have of phase 2. So don't delete requirements because it won't have. As long as the requirement came from your stakeholders, document it. Do not delete it. We will prioritize it, but it's still a valid requirement. Okay? I'm going to give you examples of, use Moscow to give you examples, I think in the next slide. We have requirements agreements. So seeking consensus on the requirement and its prioritization from the group. We say group because in many cases anyway, you're going to be gathering requirements from multiple people at the same time. Sometimes maybe 2, sometimes 3. Of course, there are times when it's just one-on-one, but this is more applicable where you're gathering requirement from multiple people. You want all the people involved to agree, right? Because remember, you're going to seek approval of those requirements before they're built, right? So there needs to be a central agreement to say, this is what has been documented, this is the prioritization, and we're good with what's in there. Okay? If as a BA you keep trying to get requirements agreement and it's not working, feel free to loop other people in, right? Talk to your PM about it. Your PM may talk to the project sponsor if needed. But please don't just go directly to the sponsor unless there's no PM. And definitely do not go to executive management. Unless, of course, there's no sponsor. Even if there's no sponsor, there has to be somebody. There's somebody you're reporting to, right? Okay. So let's look at, I already talked about this and you can take a look at it later. Must have, vital things you can't live without. Should have, things that are important but not vital. Could have, nice to have. Won't have, things that provide little or no value, little to no value that they can do without. But again, this is in the context of the current work that is being done. Like I said, won't have today may be the number one must have in phase two. So it's just something to bear in mind. So now we're going to go into requirement elicitation techniques. What does that mean? How do we go about, now that we understand the lay of the land for a requirement, how do we go about gathering gathering the actual requirements? What are the different tools and techniques that a BA can use to gather requirements? So there are multiple tools. Whichever tool you choose to use, let the stakeholders you're going to be working with, let them know what the tool is and what to expect. Okay? When your end users understand the tool, they know how to carry themselves when they come into a meeting, they know how to prepare for the meeting, things like that. Okay, so interviews is one of the ways that a BA can gather requirements. Okay, this is where a BA is eliciting information from one or more people by talking to them and documenting their response. So, like a normal interview, you've probably interviewed somebody before, somebody has interviewed you before. Now, these are some of some best practices. Before you interview someone, share an agenda with them. Let them know you're going to be interviewing and what type of questions you're going to be asking. That way, they can come prepared with some information. If not, they're going to take that entire 1 hour thinking about a solution and probably not even telling you anything useful. Choose a location where the interviewees feel comfortable and won't be easily distracted. So let's say this is not a remote job, right? And you're going to be talking to the marketing manager. In your experience, people come into the marketing manager's office every 5 minutes asking questions. Well, please do not hold that meeting in the manager's office because your meeting is going to be interrupted every 5 minutes if the manager doesn't shut their door. Choose a time when people are most likely to be attentive. Do not schedule a meeting Monday morning because people are still in weekend mode. And Friday afternoon, I mean by Thursday evening, people are already in weekend mode, right? So you may not want to schedule meetings on Monday mornings or Friday afternoons. When you start the meeting, thank the interviewers, introduce yourself, and let them know if you're going to be recording. Please always get permission before recording. I don't know if I've mentioned this before, but sometimes the information people give you when they're not being recorded is different from when they're being recorded. People want to protect their jobs. There may be some truths they want to share with you, they can't share if you're recording. I've been in a meeting where, of course, I got the I asked if I could record and they said I could record and I started recording and at some point in the meeting I was like, I have this other information I can share with you, but you have to stop the recording. Because of course I wanted to hear it, so I stopped the recording. So even though I couldn't necessarily document what he told me when I stopped the recording, it helped me better understand what we were talking about and the reason why some decisions were being made the way they were being made. Okay, so imagine if I didn't tell that person I was recording and I was just secretly recording. And then he was telling me this part, he didn't want captured on the recording, but somehow found out that I was recording. Okay, that's not going to be a happy stakeholder, right? Okay. After the interview, send notes, like whatever you capture during the interview, send it to them for verification. And as a courtesy, right, they spent 1 hour telling me about things. Sometimes, like my current job, some of the documentation that I prepared, I did the current state analysis. We'll talk about that later. And till today, they still asking me, oh, can you send me a copy of that document? Because that document is the latest version, like a document that shows what they do today and how they do it. So it's really beneficial for them because when they hire someone new, they can just go read it. All right. And then communicate next steps to your attendees. So, what are the advantages of an interview? It doesn't require a lot of preparation. Okay. Scheduling can be fairly easy as well. Because chances are you're not interviewing 20 people at once, compared to if you were in a large workshop and there were like maybe 5 or 10 people there. Interviews are usually one-on-one, max a couple people, right? It requires less stakeholder commitment because, again, you're not going to be interviewing somebody for 3 hours. Either you get tired, they'll get tired, or both parties will get tired, right? And then it provides an opportunity to explore in greater detail because you're interviewing, they're giving you information and you're asking follow-up questions. Okay. One of the cons of interview is that it may reflect the point of view of the person you're interviewing. And it may also reflect your own point of view because there's really not that many people to redirect your thinking. So you are asking questions based on what you know. But what about the things you don't know? Chances are you are not asking those questions, right? So unless you're fairly comfortable with the topic, interview may not be the best. But even if you're not familiar with the topic, if you know how to ask questions, right? How to ask probing questions for you to get the information you need, you will be very good with your interviews will turn out good. I like interviews, but then again, I've had a chance to build my comfort level with it. Okay. Types of questions you can ask during an interview, right? Open-ended questions. These are the type of questions that encourage this discussion. So please describe how you do this activity. And then they describe it to you step by step. Okay. You have close-ended questions. Those are the type of questions that the answer you get will be a yes or a no. Bear in mind that close-ended questions do not encourage conversations, right? Or discussions. However, they have their own place because in some situations, you really need a yes or no. You don't need stories. Okay? For example, do you require only 2 people to approve an invoice? It is yes or no. Sometimes it may be like, well, we require 2 people if, so they may say no. We require 2 people if the amount is more than $5,000, right? So the point here just being knowing when to ask open or close-ended questions. If you're just starting out in the conversation, I encourage you use open-ended questions. When you know enough, you can then start using close-ended questions to finalize that thought, right? Of is it yes or no? Now you already have the details that you need, right? And then you have those questions where it's black or white, it's yes or no. Okay? Then we have limited choice questions. This is where you give the person or people you're interviewing a set of options to choose from, right? So it's A, B, or C. Again, whether you'd use open, closed, or limited choice questions, it really depends on the topic of conversation, right? You would need to figure it out. Usually you need a combination, right? But I'd encourage you to start with open-ended questions. We have leading questions. These are the type of questions that will prompt the person to talk, right? Sometimes you're in these meetings and the person isn't talking much. You have to be able to get those words out from them. So would you agree that tell them one of the options that you know, even if you're not 100% sure that is what it is, would you agree that if an invoice is, more than $10,000, but you said that invoices of $5,000 or more need 2 signatures, right? Would you agree that the 2 signatures can come from people on the same level, right? Or something along those lines? Would you agree? And they'll be like, yeah, actually, and then they'll start talking. Again, like I said, whether it's leading, open-ended, close-ended, right? You just need to get a conversation going and get the type of answers that you need. Okay, we have probing questions. Probing questions are follow-up questions. So like you see here, so each invoice may cover more than one actual customer, right? And then they'll begin to explain. How did you get this question? So each invoice may cover more than one actual customer. They told you when you asked an open-ended question. It was one of the things they told you. And now you're following up with a probing question. Okay. So that is interviews. Again, in a nutshell, interview is when you're having a one-on-one conversation with one or a few people and you're asking them questions about the process or the topic, right? And if you know nothing about the topic because they just had it yesterday, when you're sending out that meeting invite, ask them for documentation that can tell you a bit about the process in preparation for the meeting. The only way to know is to ask. Okay, now we're moving to workshops. Workshops are considered one of the most effective ways of requirement gathering. Typically, in a workshop, you have more, it's a larger group you're working with, right? And what you want to do ideally is you want to get the conversation started and then sit back and let the conversation continue. If the conversation is dying down and you know there's still information, throw another question in there and get them talking. With a conversation, everybody can hear everybody else, right? Which is good because if somebody said something that was off track, somebody else is probably going to say, that's actually not how it happens. Okay? And that's why if you look at the third point here, promotes trust, mutual understanding, and strong communication among project stakeholders and team. Workshops are really important if you're trying to get cooperative approaches. We know that what we need to build, we need an agreement, right? Because we're building it in one way for all the impacted teams, right? So we need all the impacted teams to agree on what we're building. What are your responsibilities in a workshop? Please focus on the objectives and adhere to the agenda. What agenda? The agenda that you included in the meeting invite when you scheduled the workshop. In your meeting invite, please have an agenda in there and put a schedule. This meeting is from 9 a.m. to 11 p.m. 9 a.m. to 9:15, we're going to do introductions. 9:15 to 10, we're going to talk about the actual requirements, right? 10 o'clock to this, we're going to do that. Share the agenda, let people know what to expect during the 2-hour period. And then make sure that we abide by it. What does that mean? We really need to wrap up introductions by 10:15 because that is what you put in the agenda. Okay? Keep on track and follow the timetable. Be engaging to ensure participation. You see somebody who's being quiet or you see somebody who can't stop talking, you need to moderate it. The reason you invited every single person in that meeting was that you wanted to hear their point of view. So please hear the point of view. Encourage those who are not talking to talk. One way you could do that is to say, so we're 30 minutes into the meeting and Abiola hasn't said one word. But Joe just, mentioned something about the process that they do. And then you'd be like, oh, so Joe, thank you for what you mentioned. You just mentioned this, that, and that. Abiola, what are your thoughts about it? Okay? And if Abiola keeps saying, I have no thoughts, I agree with Joe, I agree with this person, and I agree with that person, you may get a sense that Abiola does not feel comfortable enough to talk in there. What you want to figure out is why. Is the manager in there? Or maybe they don't know enough about the topic, right? If they're not talking because the manager is in there, you may need a separate meeting with them. If they're not talking because every time they want to talk, somebody is talking over them, then you may need to switch the meeting into calling people's names before they talk. Okay? Record discussions yourself or use a scribe. And by recording can be writing it out as well, right? Or actually doing a voice recording or use a scribe. So a scribe is somebody who helps with writing, scribbling, right? To be honest, most BAs don't have the luxury of having a scribe. You have the BA and you have the scribe. But if you have a scribe, somebody to help you with documenting what's being said, so you can focus on helping the team keep the conversation going. If you have a scribe, fantastic. Okay. At the end of the workshop, summarize the key points that were brought up during the workshop. Now they've been talking for 1 hour. Summarize the point and say it back to them if like this is not a very large workshop, or send it to them after the meeting. And then invite and encourage them to give feedback. Maybe you misunderstood something they said. Maybe there's something extra they remember now that the meeting is over. Or maybe there's something they told you, but now they found out it's actually incorrect. Okay? So encourage feedback just so you know that you're on track. Okay? What are the different roles in a workshop? We have the participants. These are the people who would contribute to the conversation. They're knowledgeable about the subject matter, and sometimes they have decision-making authority. Sometimes, not all the time. We have a scribe. A scribe is somebody who's good at note-taking, and usually somebody who understands the topic. So if this was going to be a, technical conversation to an extent, you may want to bring in a technical scribe. Because half the time you are going to be trying to even figure out what they're talking about anyway. So bring somebody who understands the topic and may even be able to, help you formulate some of the right questions to ask. Again, chances are your workshop is not going to be technical, but if you were ever in that situation, at least go with somebody who can help you. Okay. Then we have the facilitator, who is often the business analyst. You have good communication skills, you have emotional intelligence, right? You're not just listening to people, you're looking at the body language, you're looking at the stats, like if there's a conflict brewing, you can quickly identify it and start addressing it immediately. If somebody is being stifled, you can quickly identify that and address it. If somebody won't stop talking, you quickly notice it and you address it. Okay? And you can steer the group to a conclusion without influencing what the conclusion of the decision is. Sometimes people just keep talking and there's no end to the talk. But you know that this talk you need to wrap it up. We don't have all day to have this conversation, right? So you look for a way to steer the group towards the conclusion. And sometimes this means repeating some of what they've said. So they told you a particular thing and they've said 10 other things on there after that. Sometimes the things they've even told you contradict one another, right? But because you're listening intently, because remember, you are a facilitator, you're not a part of the conversation. So what should you be using all your time for is to understand what they're talking about, right? Understand what they're talking about and ask follow-up questions until you've unraveled it and decomposed it to the simplest level. Other things to consider during a workshop, okay? The success of your workshop is dependent on having the right people in there. Have a mix of people. Have a diverse group. So what is a homogeneous group? A homogeneous group is when you have a group of individuals with the same background or perspective, okay? If you have a homogeneous group, you will hear things from the point of view of the people you have in the meeting. They all think the same way anyway. But on the other end, you could have a heterogeneous group, which is people with diverse backgrounds and perspectives. Now, the thing to note about this is that when you have people who think differently in a meeting, there is a higher likelihood of conflict. But trying to avoid conflict is not necessarily the solution to the issue, right? So as much as we want to avoid conflict, we need to resolve what might create the conflict. If there's conflict because people think differently, and because of that, you choose to meet with only one group, what you've just done is an easy way out and you've missed out on the other set of requirements, right? So one of two things you could do. Schedule meetings with different homogeneous groups. So groups of people who think alike, right? Meet with them, group 1, group 2, group 3. We know group 1, group 2, group 3 don't think alike. But because we don't want that conflict, we'll then meet with group 1 separately, group 2 separately, group 3 separately. Now, you can already tell that you're going to spend more time if you are meeting with 3 groups compared to if you're meeting with 1, which will be the heterogeneous group, right? Yes, there may be conflict, but if you have good conflict management skills, you may be able to resolve it even in that meeting or through a follow-up meeting. The main point here being you want the point of view of heterogeneous groups. whether you then want to meet with different homogeneous groups or you want to bring them together. And this is not always groups, sometimes it's individuals, right? Figure out what's best for you based on your level of comfort with how well you can manage people in such a meeting. Okay? Advantages of workshops. They're faster than interviews because with workshops, you're going to have more people in the room if it's a workshop, right? Disadvantage is you need more preparation time. Facilitating a workshop can get complex pretty fast, depending on the number of people you have in there. And then imagine 10 people trying to tell you what's happening, right? It may be hard to follow. So if you're just starting out, my recommendation would be leave workshops for now, unless the workshop is like 3 people. But even 3 people, can 3 people come at you at once and you'll be fine? Like you need to make that determination, right? And in all fairness, it's not like 3 people actually just come at you and they start talking over you. No. But one person talks, the other one picks it up, the third person picks it up, and they're going back and forth and all of that. Can you follow that process? If you can't, maybe start with interviews and then continue building your comfort level. Right? You, the BA, you get to decide which tool you want to use. At least oftentimes, I don't think a PM has told me. Actually, I take that back. I've worked a job where the PM had said we're going to do workshops, and these workshops had like 25 people. Those were actually in my early days as a BA. Interesting times. But usually you get to decide which tool you want to use. So again, find your level of comfort and stay there as long as you need to before you move to the next level. But again, strike a balance is what I'll tell you. If your stakeholder group is going to be like 50 people and you want to do interviews, you need all the time in the world to get through that, right? So find the balance in between your level of comfort and what is actually reasonable in the time frame that you have. How do you prepare for a requirement gathering workshop? Identify who your stakeholders are, the stakeholders that will be involved in the workshop. Carefully select your attendees, right? Maybe a mid-sized group. Having a really large group can be hard to manage, like I said. It may also slow down the workshop because before you go around everybody in the room just even once, time is up, right? And you may not have had an opportunity to get all the information that you need. Define your workshop's agenda, okay? Communicate the agenda before time. That's the recommendation, okay? And determine what would be used to document the output. What do we mean by that? Sometimes in workshops, right? Let's say this is an in-person workshop. In the meeting room, there may be whiteboards, right? And those whiteboards may be what you're going to be scribbling on as they talk, or your scribe will be scribbling on. Other times, you're going into the meeting with your laptop and you're typing as they talk. Find out what is available to you and what will be the best tool for you to use. If you don't have a scribe and you need to capture all of this yourself, yet you don't type fast, like you type A and then you need to look for G, maybe your laptop is not the best option, right? Maybe writing on a whiteboard. Alternatively, sometimes in workshops, another thing you can do is you have all these yellow sticker notes, and then when you throw out a question, people can write on the sticker note to say to document their thoughts, right? And they give it all to you. So there are many ways of going about this, is what I'm saying. Find one that works for you and stick with it. So use a scribe if there is one. Schedule a session over one or a few days, right? If it's a large group, don't try to hold the meeting in 4 hours. People get tired, right? Two-hour sessions or 1 hour session. 1 hour is not even enough time if you have a very large group, right? Because before they all introduce themselves, that would even be time lost already. Okay, make sure you have the room that you're going to be holding the meeting in booked. Again, this is assuming an in-person job, right? And send materials in advance to the attendees. Help them prepare. It would increase productivity. If they know what they're going to be talking about, they will even come to the meeting with their questions ready. If you understand what I mean, they'll come to the meeting and their questions would already be ready. They'll come with questions ready to have a conversation. Okay. When you're doing a workshop, right, some of the things you can do is have an icebreaker. Let people introduce one another, maybe a short game, just for people to, be a bit more relaxed. Okay. Then get the requirements that you actually came to get. Ask them about their processes. How do you do what you do today? Why do you do this? Who does it? Ask those questions, right? And the good thing about interviews is that as one person is talking, like I mentioned earlier, others can hear them, right? So if there are conflicting views, sometimes it's even the people in the meeting be like, no, 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 that's not how that happens. I think I mentioned that before. And if somebody doesn't, but because you have been listening intently, right? Somebody says something that contradicts what the other person said 15 minutes ago. This is not the time to be quiet. This is the time to bring it up and say, oh, that's interesting what you just said. A short while ago, Mr. A said this other thing, right? Which is it? Okay. And then help the team stay focused. If they're going off tangent and talking about things that are not relevant to the workshop, help them get their attention back to the workshop. Okay. So as the facilitator, right, you'd establish a professional and objective tone. So be the first to talk during the meeting if possible. Set the tone of the meeting. Okay. Housekeeping rules. If this meeting is big enough, or you already know that, well, if you don't moderate it, they're just going to go off track and everybody's going to be talking at the same time. Let them know what the rules of the meeting are. If, a question is, if you, the BA, ask the question, people can write down, whatever their responses are, and then they give it to you and you read it out. If that's how you've chosen to go about it, or if you read out the question and people have an answer to it, they can talk as long as somebody else isn't already talking. Meaning that don't cut into somebody else who's talking. Whatever the ground rules are, let them know. Then let them know the goal, because the workshop is the workshop is an activity, right? An activity which is a means to an end. The end is to meet the business goal. Let them know what that goal is, right? And let them know what the agenda of the meeting is. At this time in the meeting, this is what we're going to be talking about, and then we move on to the next thing. Okay, moderate the meeting, manage it, and keep the team on track. Don't go past time, because remember that they may have been coming from one meeting to attend your meeting, and they may not have even had the time for lunch. So if you told them 2 hours, try not to go past 2 hours. I'm guilty of that sometimes because, well, the time I booked for the meeting is over and I have just this one more question. I'm like, I don't want to book another meeting for a question. But you know what I do is, rather than just say, oh, this is just going to take 5 more minutes, let me just take the time. I ask them to say, oh, I'm going to need 5 more minutes of your time because I have this one more question. Would you prefer I continue now, or should I book a follow-up meeting? Chances are they'll be like, just continue now. Don't book a follow-up meeting. All right? Okay. So the BA, right, facilitates the process of decision making and building consensus. Again, where there is disagreement, right? See that we use the word facilitate. You're not making the decision. Nobody is asking you that because you claim to have 10 years experience, you should be able to make the decision. No, you're facilitating the process of making the decision. You're not contributing to the decision, and you're definitely not participating in that decision making. Okay? You want to ensure that all stakeholders in the meeting participate. So I've talked about that, right? If anybody is being too quiet, try to look for a way to get them talking. And if there's somebody who can't stop talking, try to look for a way to help them keep quiet respectfully. Okay? Ask the right questions, analyze the information they providing to you as you're there, you're analyzing. It's not like you take the information and go analyze it later. Yes, you will analyze some later, but if you don't do some analysis on the spot, you may not even have the next question to ask them. Okay. So I was talking about ways in which you can document what they're telling you. You can use notes on flip charts. You can use post-it notes. You can quickly scribble user stories as they're talking to you, and you can use mind maps. The next slide is a mind map. I'll show you an example of a mind map. How you choose to document this, again, there is no hard and fast rule. I don't even think there's a best practice. of all these options, what works best for you based on your area of strength? You know you like nobody else knows you, right? You need to identify what will work best for you. Nobody is going to judge your choice as long as the choice works for you. So here is an example of a mind map, how you can use a mind map to expand on a topic, to get people talking. So the topic of this conversation is sports, right? And so you're like, what sports are we talking about here? And then they begin to mention all the sports, individual sports, water sports, team sport, contact sport. And then you hone in on water sport and say, so tell me about water sports. What are the different options? They'll be like water aerobics, swimming, diving, water polo. And they'll be like, oh, water aerobics. So tell me, what types of activities do we do with water aerobics? So even swimming, do we do butterfly? Do we do all the other styles, right? So see how you're just expanding all the topic till you get to the lowest level of what they need to be able to do in the system. And then you begin to document the requirement. But we started from sport, very high level, and then we continue to blow that out and expand it and identify all the different parts of it. And that's how you want to do requirement gathering. They've told you about the account creation. Okay, so what are the different parts of account creation today? We know we're implementing Salesforce, but they do it manually today. So for you to understand how to build it in Salesforce, you need to understand what they do manually today. What are the different parts of everything you do manually today? So when you're in that meeting and you want to use mind map style, you start with a high level topic and you say, tell me about the different parts of this thing that you do today. And they give you maybe 4 different levels, right? You take one of them, you focus on it, and then you work with them to expand it again. Okay? And then till you get to a point where you have a circle that cannot be further broken down. Again, that's if you use a mind map, right? But even if you didn't use a mind map and you're writing this out on a flip chart or on a post-it note, that is the general idea. We start from this high-level points, right? And then we continue to decompose it. We continue to break it down and break it down until we break it down to the most minute part of what they do. Okay, so now that the workshop is done, you want to follow up if there are any open action items. You know, maybe there was a question nobody could answer, you need to follow up on it. Or somebody said, oh, I have more information about what you're talking about. Send me an email and I'll be able to provide it to you. Follow up on all things, right? 1 second. Yeah, so follow up on all those things and make sure, again, just like with the interview, right? Whatever you've documented from that meeting, share it with them to validate it. Sharing it with them is for their benefit and for your benefit as well. If you've misunderstood or misdocumented something, this is an opportunity for somebody who's more knowledgeable on the subject matter to catch that error and help you lead you in the right direction. The next one we're going to, again, let me mention this. All we've been talking about is requirement gathering techniques, right? So embedded within the technique are the ways in which you can go about eliciting the requirement. Like if you were doing observation, which is what I'm going to talk about now, the way you'd approach it will be different from interviews. But whichever tool you use is what will determine how you want to go about getting that information from them. Like for workshops, I just gave you a few ideas now and I showed you a mind map. So in case anybody is still wondering, so how do I gather requirement? See the how. There is nothing more than what it is I'm telling you. The goal is you want to get information from them. How do you want to go about getting the information? Right? Do you want to do an interview? Do you want to do a workshop? And if you choose the workshop, how do you want to go about the workshop? Okay? How well you can manage the tool is what would determine the quality of the requirements you're going to get from them. Because remember, the people you're talking to them in their mind, they have needs, right? And they're going to communicate the needs the way they can tell you, like, I need lunch. I need lunch is so high level. right? You know that you need to break it down. Who is this customer? What kind of protein can they digest? Do they have any food allergies? Things like that, right? You're the one who will then figure out how you want to probe to fully understand not just the high level need, but the lower level need. Okay? So let's go to observation. Observation is when you watch people, right? Basically, you're observing them. You observe people with permission. But as you observe them, what you're trying to do is to see how they work. Okay? When you're observing, you can do it passively or you can do it actively. Okay? In any case, you need to let the person you're observing know that you're observing them, whether it's going to be passive or active. When is observation passive? It is passive when you're watching the person work without interacting with them. You are out of their way. They know you're watching them and they're okay with it, but you're not engaging them. Active is you're observing them, but you're interacting with them. So why are you doing it that way? Why did you hit that button? This document, why did you just sign it before you put it into a file? Okay? Most times when you observe, right, I think you most likely do active observation, right? But again, just know that sometimes it's passive. This task this person is doing today is very sensitive. They need to focus. Usually, when they're doing it, we don't want anybody talking to them. So, when you're observing them passively, you can note all your questions and then ask after they're done completing the task. Okay? Advantage, you can see it live. You are not asking them. Because remember, when you're asking them and you're not seeing it, they're telling you what they can remember at that time. Nobody is promising you they can remember anything 100%. And that's one of the reasons why you want to, whatever document you have, you want to send it to them to validate. Because now they've had a day after the meeting, maybe they can remember another 20% of what they forgot to tell you. However, when you're observing, you can see it live what they're doing. Disadvantage is it's slow because now you have to see through it and watch. Secondly, with observing is that you cannot observe what is not being done, right? So you're really just observing the current state. And yes, that may not always be a disadvantage because if the new system is going to be like a complete reflection of what they're doing today, but just like we're going to put it in a system, then observation is good. It's good enough, right? As long as what you really need to capture is the current state. Because when you're doing workshops or interviews, right, sometimes you're not just talking about what they do today, you're talking about what they need to be able to do in the future. But observation is you're watching what is being done today. So there is no reflection of the future in that. What does that tell you? You can't do observation for a future state meeting. When you're doing a meeting to talk about what people want to be able to do in the future, right? And if what they want to be able to do in the future is different from what they're doing today, well, observation isn't going to work. Logically, like if you think about it, it's not going to work. Okay. So the next one we're going to look at is brainstorming. How are we doing? Time. Okay. The next one we're looking at is brainstorming. Okay. So again, with brainstorming, right? I don't have another, 1 second. Let me just check something here. Okay, so this diagram, it's really just a diagram, right? Right, like with brainstorming, you have multiple people in a room and everybody's just thinking and generating ideas about a topic, right? With brainstorming, just like with a workshop, you want to have a clear plan, a clear area of interest that we're going to talk about, a time limit that we're going to, like a defined time frame during which we're going to brainstorm that idea. Okay, you need to identify who is going to be included in that meeting and what role will each person play. Like you typically will be the facilitator, you're going to have participants in there, right? Again, especially with brainstorming, you want to have people from diverse backgrounds who, who would be able to contribute to that conversation, right? In brainstorming, a lot of ideas are generated. Brainstorming is usually future facing. Now that we know what the current state is and we want to try to think about what the future will look like, let's brainstorm, right? And a lot of ideas will be generated, and then all those ideas will be rated eventually because you may not be able to implement all of the ideas. So again, I just want to mention here, in case somebody is wondering, so Abiola, which of these tools will I use? My response would be you need to figure it out. Understand all the tools. And then in the situation that you find yourself, which is the best tool? I already mentioned that, for example, brainstorming is future facing, right? You usually don't brainstorm the current state. For current state, you just talk to people about it. They already do it anyway, and they can tell you what they do. You talk to the people who are doing it, and they can tell you what it is that they do. Okay. Um, so if you're doing like a future state meeting, right, brainstorming may be an option. Again, bear in mind that brainstorming like workshop may be a bit difficult for a newer BA to manage because think about brainstorming, right? Even if it's not an IT project, you put 10 people in a room and they're brainstorming, you know how ideas will be flying all over, right? Is that something you can manage? Okay. And if you still wanted to use brainstorming as a tool, right, but you wouldn't feel comfortable with 10 people, then do a smaller group and build your comfort level. Another tool you can use to gather requirements is questionnaires. Okay. In the next 7 minutes, I'll stop and we'll start taking questions. So another tool that a BA can use is questionnaires. Questionnaires are used as a second line investigation technique. So I'm thinking you probably have filled the questionnaire in the past, right? Where they're going to ask different questions and sometimes it's yes or no or not applicable, things like that, right? Questionnaires, typically with questionnaires, you can't ask follow-up questions because that questionnaire is going to get complicated. Imagine a questionnaire that says, oh, if you chose yes in number 2, so now we're on question 10. If you chose yes in number 2, then jump to question this or that. The really good questionnaires just have they have a flow to it. Your responses should not be complicated. It's usually like a Boolean value, yes, true or false, or yes or no, something along those lines, right? So with a questionnaire, right, you can't really dig deeper into a topic. The questionnaire would not be the best tool for that. Okay. So if the information you need is high level and you don't need to drill down, a questionnaire might be ideal. Of course, the types of questions you put in your questionnaire will determine the quality of information that you're going to receive. If you created a questionnaire, feel free to have somebody else review it and share feedback with you on, okay, is there good coverage? Or do you need to be asking different questions? Okay. We'll go over prototyping and I think we'll stop there for today. So 1 second, let me just check. Yeah, let's go over prototyping. Okay, so prototyping is creating a model of that final solution we're trying to build. Okay, this can be like even a drawing, a mock-up, right? Or a model or a visual design, depending on how much your company is willing to spend on the prototype. One of the mock-up tools that I've used is called Balsamic. I really like it. Very easy to learn. You can probably learn enough within a day or two, maybe on YouTube, right? I worked at a company that uses Balsamic. Only one company that I've worked in actually uses it, and it's a really cool tool. It's a tool where maybe there's a page we know we're going to be building. We're going to create a mock-up of the tool and just get feedback based on that image we've drawn. And the end users may say, move this here, move this there, that shouldn't be here, this shouldn't be there, kind of thing, right? So this is another way to get feedback or to gather requirements. It helps the users envision what this functionality would look like in the system. And it helps to catch problems early on as well. Let's say that there is a field that needs to be on that page. And when you created the mockup, it's not on there. Once you give it to the stakeholders and they look at it, within like 10 seconds, they can give you that feedback, right? Compared to you go and you are verbally describing the page, and 20 seconds into what you're saying, they've already switched off and they're thinking about lunch. It's just easier for them to look at that picture and give you feedback. One thing you should watch out for with prototyping is that people tend to become designers when they're looking at a prototype. They're not thinking fully about the requirements anymore. They're thinking about, oh, we want this to be here, we want that to be there, right? And it's okay to get the feedback from a UI standpoint because you want your users to have a good user interface and user experience, right? When they're engaging with the system. However, you don't want them to become designers. What you want is really to capture their requirements. So when you start hearing, like instead of them saying that the system should do this, when they start talking about drop down and this button and that button, they're getting into designing. And that is not what you want ideally. You want to focus on the requirements. For example, instead of saying there should be this drop down, they should be saying, oh, users need to be able to choose one of 4 options. Whether we're going to make it a drop down or we're going to make it 4 radio buttons, which is not likely. However, we're going to do it, right, is how we're going to do it. Salesforce already probably has some options anyway. And so what if they begin to mention an option that is not in Salesforce? So what we want is the requirement, the ability for users to choose one of 4 options, not what the design should look like. That's not what we're looking for. And so even when you're using prototyping, you want to tell them that this is just a guide. There's nobody saying this is what the final system would look like, because not even you, the BA, can tell them that. Okay? I think this should be our last slide here. Okay. The other thing with prototyping is it doesn't show the flow in the system, right? It doesn't show the flow in the system. So you want to include a written description of what happens when a user selects one of 4 options. What is the next thing that would happen? So sometimes what people do is they have like different, images to show what happens as the user moves through the system. So you can do that if it won't take too much time. So that's going to be multiple pictures, right? Or you can have that one picture and just write a description of what would happen as the user engages with the screen. What are the advantages of prototyping? It's easy to create and it doesn't cost a lot. Your company already pays for the license anyway. And then it encourages user involvement and the conversations that need to happen around it. The disadvantages is that there can be poor documentation, right? Because if the BA just uses the image, the mock-up, and they don't document what should happen in the system, right? Well, then it's left to interpretation. Okay, and then it impacts user expectation. Okay, so sometimes again, because the user sees it, there is a chance they may expect it. They see the design a certain way, they may expect it. Okay, and sometimes overestimate optimistic estimates, right? Or even just like I said, them thinking, oh, this is what it's going to look like. This is what Abiola showed me. That's what's going to look like. That's what the eventual solution would look like. He also doesn't really tell them about how the system might behave as well. Where are your functional requirements? We don't see them. So you don't want to use prototyping just as prototyping. There needs to be some type of documentation that would accompany it so that all of the requirements are adequately captured. When I've used prototyping, I still had my full requirement document. The prototyping was just easier to be able to get, faster feedback from a UI standpoint. It did not replace the requirement. So we're going to stop there today. I know it's a lot we've gone over today. If you have any questions, please raise your hands, questions or comments, and we'll go from there. Odunayo, go ahead.
Hello, Abiola, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, thank you so much for the class. Okay, so I have a question regarding prototyping and wireframe. right?
Yeah.
What is the difference between the wireframe and the prototype, and at what points do you use each? Because like it appears to me to be quite similar. Like just to give like, let me just ask the question like that. Yeah. So
Okay. Okay. So I explained what a prototype is, right? Which is really, the mock-up of what maybe that user interface would look like, right? And usually the prototype will be close enough when it comes to like the what the system may look like, right? So there may be slight changes here and there, right? Whereas a wireframe is really showing. So let me think of how best to put this. Okay, so a prototype, we're looking at some of the functionality of the system, right? We're looking at that drawing, whatever tool. And remember, prototype is not just mock-up, right? If I go back up here, before I go into wireframe, right? Where did I have that? So here we have mock-up, model, visual designs, the different options, right? Whereas a wireframe a wireframe is like a low fidelity point of view of what the system would look like, right? So I want to see if I can find an example and actually show you. So it's not just theoretical. If you give me a second, I should have one here. Okay, maybe I'll get one ready for tomorrow's class, but let me just go ahead and explain it. So your wireframe, they're like the backbone of the system, right? Some people will say like the skeleton or the backbone of what the product would look like. Okay, so like an architect who was drawing, architects are the ones who draw it out, right? And you can see what the building will look like before they actually start building it. Okay. Whereas your prototype is really, so if I was showing you, if I created a mock-up of what your login page will look like, it is an image that I've created just to show you this is what your login page might look like. I'm not going to say that is what it's going to look like 100% because but it can change. Whereas your wireframe, I still feel like I'm not looking for a really good way to explain this so people, because they're different. In case if what you're asking me is, do they serve the same purpose? They're actually different in how they're used. You create a prototype to get some of the feedback, early feedback, right? This is, based on the requirements you've given us, this is what this is going to look like. It is not a reflection of how we're building the system. It is not a reflection of the structure of what we're building, right? Whereas the wireframe is going to show more. It's going to show more information, but I want to be able to do better justice to this. So let me take it away. I want to look for a visual example to show everybody, not just a person who asked the question of, and not just that, what is the time and place for each one? I want to be able to explain that to you. So leave it with me. I feel like I'm not doing justice with that answer, but I'll come back to you. I should actually make a note of it. 1 second.
okay, thank you.
Okay, yeah, I made a note of it. I'll show like a visual representation of the difference tomorrow and some text to go alongside it as well. I want to be able to answer that better than I did today. Was that the only question you have today?
Yes, I think so. The
Okay.
requirements, like the requirement gathering techniques, like I think you kind of answered my question at the end. Like, how do you know? Okay, so in your experience, I know we're going to tailor it to like probably the situation, right?
Mhm.
And maybe our target audience at the time. However, based on your experience, what do you think is the most efficient way? I know there might not be a most efficient way, but I know some would definitely be better than others, right? So based on your experience, what do you think, what would you consider the most efficient, even if it's just what works for you and maybe the reason why also?
Yeah, so based on my own experience, and this is based on who I am and how I work, right? I find workshops and interviews to work best for me. The reason, the reason that I like to use that is that, in my experience anyway, that's one of the fastest ways in which I get information. I'm okay with having multiple people in the room as well. I'm able to manage that conversation. One of the things I like about it is that I'm able to hear multiple points of view at the same time. I've been in meetings where there's a manager who reports to a director, I'm having a conversation with them, and they remember things differently, right? And I know how to get the two of them talking. If a conflict arises, I know how to manage it to the point where we resolve the conflict. So that is what works for me. I like to be able to cover as much as I can in a short period of time. So as much as possible, I don't want to be meeting with people for like 4 hours in a week kind of thing, right? So one of the ways that I do that is I bring multiple people into the room. I do I think I do interviews more than I do workshops, right? Because it's easier for me to just say, so tell me what you do today. And as they're telling me, I'm getting my other probing questions, right? And I'm delving deeper into it to be able to get more information. That is what works for me. But like
Okay.
you said, that I said, what will work for you and for everybody on this call will be different. If you're a more quiet person who feels stifled when multiple people are talking, well, maybe workshop is not a good idea, at least not for now, until you get comfortable with it. One isn't better than the other. The most important thing is that given the situation you're faced with, what is the best tool for you to use? Are you having a future state conversation or you're having a current state conversation? If you're having a current future state conversation, observation is not the right tool. So this has nothing to do with your preference. It's about applicability. What applies to the situation? Number one. Then number two is if there's multiple tools you can use given the situation, which one fits your personality more or better? So that's the way that I would phrase it.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think your explanation kind of made me like another question. How do you manage I would say conflict, especially when you're the people you're talking to, you have cases, I'm coming. The people you're talking to, maybe there is a manager, and I would not use the word oppressive, and maybe they are not like really open to talk, and there's just like or maybe there is a case where there are like conflicting opinions and it's just turning into a bit of chaos. How do you manage such situations?
Right. So those are two different scenarios, right? The first one you talked about is maybe a stifling situation where some people are not able to talk because their boss is in the meeting. Well, schedule a different meeting with the people who can't talk. Because no matter what you do, they can't talk, they can't talk. They care about their job. They're not about to lose their job because you want to gather requirements. So if that is prevalent, just schedule another meeting. In the other scenario where there's conflict, right, and they can't seem to settle down, you, the BA, need to figure out what is the cause of the conflict. Sometimes there's a conflict because these people genuinely do things differently. And they're only finding out in the meeting that B does it differently from A. So what you, the BA, will try to do is get to the bottom of it. Where is this conflict coming from? Is somebody doing it wrong today? Or are they both even doing it wrong? Those are the things you want to figure out before it gets to the point where people are getting angry at one another, right? And if they're both doing it differently, but one is not wrong, or both ways are right, for example, but we know that in the future, in the system, we're going to do it in only one way. That's where we're going to have that requirement negotiation, right? Where we're going to negotiate, okay, if we have just one way of doing this in the system, A, can you work with what B does today? B, can you work with what A works today? Remember that sometimes when there's conflict, it has nothing to do with the conversation. It's just two people who didn't like one another before you scheduled your meeting. So you, the BA, need to figure out what is the underlying issue here. Are these two people that are just going at one another because they don't like one another? Are these two people who are going at one another because they genuinely do not agree? They see things differently. The cause of the conflict is what will determine how you'd address it. If it's two people that genuinely don't like one another, well, you may not want to have the two of them in the meeting at the same time because they may just continue derailing your meeting. At some point, you're going to need to make that determination. So to answer your question anyway, I'll say the first thing is find out what the cause of the conflict is. If it is personal, there may not be much you can do about it. If it is not personal, but is related to process, well, then unravel it. hey, can you give us a bit more information about what you do and why you do it that way, given there is another option? Ask the same question or B, and let them get talking, right? Let other people weigh in, because chances are they're not the only two in the meeting. Ask the other people in the room, what do you think about this? What do you know about this? What do you actually do today? Okay, and as those conversations continue to evolve, you work it towards resolving that conflict. And sometimes it may require talking to the two parties even outside of the meeting. Sometimes it may require that if the two of them can't seem to settle down. It's neither black or white, is what I'm trying to tell you here. It's just like managing your friends, managing family members. These people at work, they're regular human beings as well. You know, your conflict management skill at home, with your friends, that's the same thing you're going to employ here. Okay?
Okay, thank you so much, Dado.
Yeah, no problem. Any other questions or comments if there are no questions? Or any thoughts at all, especially if you're already working as a BA and you want to share your experience? Anybody? Okay. Can anybody tell me how they feel about today's topic? Is it overwhelming? Is it a bit much? Wow, we're very quiet today. Okay, well, I guess we'll wrap it up today then. We'll continue with requirement gathering techniques tomorrow and talk more about requirement gathering tomorrow. If you have any questions, like I always say, feel free to put it in a chat if you do not want to talk, and I'll pick it up from there. Otherwise, we'll continue tomorrow. All right, thank you.
Thank you so much. Good
Thanks,
night.
Fiona.
Thank